And hopefully we have time to go through all of this because there is a lot. There's a couple of changes from when I did this last year, and we'll go through those, but they're easy enough on the purchase agreement. So starting right up at the top section, the date is going to be the date that the offer was written. And then you're going to put a full legal name of your buyers. You want to make sure it's their legal name because this is what the attorneys and the lenders are going to see as far as the names they take title in. And then and usually it's the same as whatever's on their driver's license. So hopefully you've already seen that. For the seller, you want to double check the MLS with Realist to make sure that you have the full legal name. Most listing agents do get it right, but we just want to make sure that we're doing this from the actual information. And then here you're going to fill in selling firm. If you're writing this for a buyer, that is Coastal Town. And then fill in from the MLS, the listing firm information. Coming down to the first section, agreement to sell the property, you're going to put in the legal description. This is not the same as the tax information. The tax and parcel information are the same, but this is the legal description. It's usually where we see lot, sub, things like that. Double check it from the MLS listing in Realist to make sure that they are the same. And then you're going to finish that with the full address as we would know it as well. All right, come down to the deposit. So we want to stress here that you're going to fill in the amount of the EMD deposit written out in words first, and then you're going to follow that up where you write it numerically. For most of the rest of the contract, those two are flip-flopped, where you write it numerically first. But either way, just take the time to make sure that this is correct and check your decimal points. In my first year, I ended up writing an offer for $2 million instead of 200,000. So learn from my mistakes. And then you're going to check the box here of how they plan on making that EMD payment. We have had a lot of conversation in the last couple of weeks coming from Jones, Walker, and Lake that if the way that they intend to pay actually changes and the right box is not marked, it can make it difficult. It can require an addendum. They may not be able to accept it, etc. So if you need to check more than one box because you're not sure, that is completely fine. The document that Jones, Walker, and Lake can send out with information on how to pay it, that qualifies as an ACH, which is this one right here, the automated clearinghouse. And if they're doing an electronic check payment, you want to click other and put in here electronic payment. And then you're going to fill this in with either Jones, Walker, and Lake or whatever settlement company your clients want to use. If they have a relationship with a different one, obviously that's fine. But what needs to be clear is that we as agents never, ever hold funds. So we never put our names in this line. I'm going to come down here and check either buyer has paid or buyer will pay. Hang on one second. Let me just sure somebody's trying to get in. Nope. Okay. True. I would say probably 90% of the time, the box you're going to check is will pay. Some can arise where, say, your buyers actually got under contract previously and went ahead and paid that EMD to the settlement company. And then for whatever reason, that transaction was terminated. They have the option to leave that money with the escrow agent if they're still home shopping. I'll encourage that because if they do request for it back, unless they're going to pick up a physical check in person, which Jones, Walker, and Lake can do within a day, but if they're expecting it to be wired or electronically, that can take between 30 and 45 days. So if they're still shopping, it's just really best for them to leave it here. And that's why we have those options for the box. Okay. Note for paying the EMD, when it comes down to the timeline, what's important here is it's a different timeline than pretty much any of the others within the transaction, because this has to be paid within 2 business days. So that does not include holidays and weekends, but for just about every other timeline, holidays and weekends count as a day. So that's one difference here. And then coming down to the purchase price, this is going to be where you're going to fill in numerically first, so it's flip-flopped from up above, and then the number written out in full words. Okay. So what we don't want to see in the section here with the down payment and the loan type is TBD. A lot of times we do put in percentages, but if at all possible, if we can get the actual amount of the down payment and of the loan, we can always go back in and change this before ratification if that number goes up or down. But what you want to make sure that you do is that you've at least had a conversation with the lender to make sure that the total of these two match the purchase price. Simple enough, just take some extra time for due diligence. And then this line here only gets filled in with one of three options: conventional, VA, or FHA. You don't necessarily need to put down VHDA or anything else here. And this box here will only be signed after all changes have been initialed by all sides. This is our ratification box. This date is usually going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 days after the date at the top of the purchase agreement, but this becomes the new date for the purpose of all timelines. So every single page does need to be initialed by buyer and seller at the bottom of the page, because on our purchase agreement, every single page has at least a checkbox, if not something that we're filling in. I say that because I have had clients who say, why can't I just sign the last page? Whatever, this is how we do it. All right, come down here. We have the closing cost conversation and settlement expenses. The verbiage I have here, it's a little bit hard to see. I apologize for that. But my verbiage says seller to contribute 3% or whatever it is that you're asking for. It can be, talk to the lender, make sure that it doesn't go above the amount as stated in the loan. Conventional has a limit, how much can be contributed. So seller to contribute 3% of the purchase price, again, spelling out numerically and then writing it numerically, of the purchase price towards the buyer closing costs, prepaid points, funding fees, appraisal, title insurance, survey, inspection fees, settlement fees, and any other costs, including debt reduction. It's important to include that here, especially for our VA loans. That's where that comes into play. At buyer's sole discretion, and what I find is the most important is approved by lender. Need to have, this is a blanket kind of umbrella to cover everything. You can copy and paste from here. You can come up with your own, but I like this one as it includes just about everything. All right, we're going to come down here to loan application. You're going to put the name of the company. You're going to put the specific name of the loan officer and their contact information. I find it's best to go ahead and actually put their cell phone number right in here. It is going to be on the pre-approval that you're submitting with this, but let's try to make everybody's lives easier and just put this right here. Now, you can, and we've talked about this recently, you can actually have a couple of pre-approvals from different lenders. And at the time of filling out this purchase agreement, if your client has not decided which one to use, say, for example, they come to you and they have a Navy Fed pre-approval, right? We all kind of deal with that. And then we say, we know what the listing agents in our area and sellers are looking for. Would you mind getting pre-approved with one of our local lenders? Put them both here so that we do not have to ask permission if we go back and forth between one or more. So just fill it all out, change the font. And then that way, you see where it comes down here in bold, it says, should buyer wish to change lender, buyer must obtain written permission from seller. To avoid that, that's one of the reasons why we want to put any pre-approval information up above, as well as I like to add this verbiage here: buyer reserves the right to adjust down payment and or loan amounts at their discretion without having to request permission to the seller from the seller. Again, so say it's a situation where they are putting down 10% and then they want to put down 20% or vice versa. We don't have any issues moving forward once that's decided. All right, intent to occupy, does not intend to occupy. That's pretty self-explanatory. Be careful with the loan types. Talk to the lender about that. All right. So an important section here that I have underlined has the right to transfer the property without obtaining consent or approval of any other party, including without limitation judgment creditors, lien holders, and other lenders, or any court, including bankruptcy court or court having jurisdiction with respect to the distribution of marital property. That identifies the divorce. And if this actually is subject to any of those issues, we will put that verbiage in separately a little bit farther along. But this is to bring to light anytime there's a third party approval that's needed. And this is the box where we're going to write in any exceptions to that. Here are a couple of examples. Short sale needing bank approval, bankruptcy, divorce needing court approval. These kinds of situations absolutely should be disclosed on the MLS listing as well as in the agent remarks. If it seems muddy, pick up the phone and ask the listing agent. Just get to the bottom of it before putting in this offer. All right. So this is where we just are going to drop some check boxes if it's on septic or not. Settlement possession. So here we're going to put a calendar date, and you absolutely want to have a conversation with the lender before you put in an offer. If you're going to write that we're closing in 15 to 20 days, you need to know for sure that your lender is able to do that. As far as the extension, if you leave this blank, this will be automatically 10 days. In this market, especially when rate locks are an issue, I like to only have it extended by 5 days. And I'll be honest, even as the listing agent, I'll go in and change it from 10 to 5 and see if they're okay with that. But anything longer than that, we can run into a situation where they're out of their locked rate. And when it comes down to needing an extension for whatever reason, you want to have a conversation with the lender about that loan lock rate as well, so that you're not inevitably putting somebody in trouble and not needing to. All right. The important thing here is something should be deemed to include an extension only if what that's to is if there are lender and title issues. No other reason. Now, all of these issues, as you can see from notes over here, this whole section is addressed in the original CDIF, which at this point you've already had them sign because they have signed a buyer brokerage agreement with you. And a lot of this purchase agreement just reiterates some things on there. But what's important to understand is that here it is, these two marks here, processing and close the specific loan in compliance with applicable law, or correcting any defects reported by a title examiner. Those are the only two ways that you can have it extended basically without an addendum. It's not to say that you can't extend closing for other reasons. They just come along with needing an addendum. Not insurmountable at all. All right. Coming down to clear deed and title. So what we see here, again, is possible third-party issues. If it's an REO bank-owned or estate sale, if it's a special warranty deed, all of these should be disclosed in the MLS if this is the case. Even if it's disclosed in the MLS, you want to copy that right into this section here. Initials on the bottom of the page. So the survey. Pick and choose. There's different reasons to get a survey. There's different reasons to completely avoid it. Obviously, with condos and townhouses, especially if the townhouse has a fence, there's really not a major reason for it. If somebody does desire it, we put forth that information to the title company, and they're the ones who order it for us. Surveys can take 14 to 21 days. Now, if your buyer doesn't want one and you mark waives and then the buyer changes their mind, they won't have the opportunity to add it as part of the transaction. Of course, they can always hire a third-party surveyor at their own expense. Well, it's going to be their expense either way, but in their own timeline, but it won't have anything to do with this transaction. So if your buyer is just not sure, right? They're talking about putting in a fence, they're talking about putting in a pool, they're talking about doing anything major to the backyard. You want to go ahead and check desires, because if you have that checked and they decide not to, you're fine. But if they checked waived and then they change their mind, they can't. So moving on, this section on prorations and escrow, you're pretty much with this firm, it's always going to be A. Bottom line, we do not do assumptions at Coastal Town Realty. So that's always going to be A. And I'll tell you that that is the number one box that is forgotten to be checked. So we're going to come down here. We're going to mark what type of financing. This has changed over the years to become a little bit more compact, but also each one does have a kick out. So you're going to fill in here the purchase price. If the purchase price is changed in negotiation before ratification, right? You go back and forth for a couple of days, you come to a final price, this line must be changed as well. If not, Lucy will catch it and send you a note. So the cash, the only thing that's really important about this section here is whether or not they want an appraisal. Most cash buyers, in my experience, are actually not interested in an appraisal. They want to get in there, they want to do some work to it, and then they're going to do an appraisal. Initials at the bottom. Okay, condition of the home. So this has read different ways over the years. This is not where you want to put any issues that you think will come up on a home inspection. Save it for the home inspection, save it for the PICRA. If there are blatant issues here, say, for example, there is a massive hole in a wall, if there is a window that's missing or cracked, things that are blaringly obvious, yes, you can put in here. What I also like to put in here is that if you have a listing agent who says, hey, we're in the process of doing this, this, and this, right? Because sometimes they bring a house to market before some work has been done to it, especially on a flip. They're going to verbally tell you that those things are going to be done. Obviously, as we know in real estate, nothing happens if it's verbal. So you're going to put those right here to hold them accountable to what they've said they're going to do. I cannot stress how important that is. You can also use this section to address if you want to have the carpet cleaned or if you want to have the home professionally cleaned. I use that a lot here during COVID. I would say professionally sanitized. We don't really necessarily see a need to do that now, but obviously it's house specific. But broom swept manner or however the contract reads, I don't find necessarily good enough. I like to put in here, have the home professionally cleaned. As a side note to that, when I started doing that, I was finding that at walkthrough that wasn't done. And what I realized that the listing agent through the process of the transaction had actually forgotten that that was in here. So now about 4 days before closing or even 5, I will shoot the listing agent a message just saying, hey, did you end up, who did you end up hiring to get the home professionally cleaned? Every single time I've done that, the agent has said, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I completely forgot. And then at that point, I actually will give them the name of some cleaning companies that I trust and have worked with and are more than willing to run out there on the weekend because that seems like it's typically when it happens. But that's the section to put that. Do you have anything to add to that as your season, Diane? Okay.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but take advantage of that box to put things in. Coming down to the physical inspection, if the buyer has not set foot, and that also means even if you've done a video walkthrough, if the buyer has physically not stepped foot in the property, you need to mark it here, and you're also going to fill out the no physical inspection addendum. Very simple, it just covers everybody. So if the buyer gets in the house after closing or at closing and they decide that they're not happy with something, you as the buyer's agent are completely covered as well as the listing agent and the seller. Because we are buyer beware state. So coming to the cap, the inspections, repairs, and treatment, the cap covers 4 different sections, which we'll go through. Hang on 1 second. Where did you go? Okay. All right, so if you leave blank, it defaults to 1. And what this is that 4 items fall under the cap. If we're stating that it won't exceed 1%, that means if it's a $300,000 property, the seller is agreeing to spend up to $3,000 on any of these 4 items that are going to come up. When the market was super crazy with 40 offers on a single property, I was lowering this to 0.5 or 0.25, depending on the age of the property, depending on the condition of the property. And depending on the type of property, if it's going to be a condo, we can really lower this. And it's just one other way that you can make your buyer's offer a little bit more competitive to come to the top of the pile. If you're not sure, reach out to a seasoned agent to kind of discuss it to see what you want to put down here. But at the end of the day, don't overthink it. When we are on the listing side, we've run a net sheet for our sellers and we have fully explained the 1%. All right, and then down here where I have underlined, if neither party agrees to pay the excess amount, so say that the 1% comes to $3,000, but there's actually $6,000 worth of work that needs to be done. Hopefully we're going to come to an agreement about how that's going to be done. Sometimes that does tie up the loan type. But if neither party agrees to pay the amount and an acceptable alternative agreement cannot be reached, then this agreement can be terminated. All parties shall execute a release agreement. And the important thing here, the deposit shall be refunded in full to the buyer. Okay, that's something that I think is overlooked on here. But again, as a listing agent, they have prepped their seller for work that might come up. So that references mostly the appraisal and required repairs when the appraiser goes out to the property and comes back and writes it conditional on repairs. That's what covers that. And that is usually where the majority of that cap goes. And then, of course, we have the moisture and termite inspection. I like to take advantage of this line down here and add anything outside the home. This is really important. Even the deck, even though it's attached, the deck, the shed, any storage unit, a detached garage, pool house, guest house, any type of outbuilding that's deemed necessary to include in this inspection. It's important to have that down here because if you don't, and then they come back when the inspector goes out, and maybe you didn't even tell them to check out the garage, but they do, you're not going to be able to ask for that work to be fixed or remedied. Typically for the inspection report, because we are buyer beware, we're going to mark buyer and buyer for both of these options. There's questions about whether or not the VA buyers can do that. I think things have changed now they can. That used to not be able to because it was an additional cost to them. So that's outside the loan guidelines. They are allowed to now? Okay.
VA buyers
can pay for their own. So that's great. But what's important here is that if the buyer marks that they shall obtain and authorize, then the buyer is in charge of putting forth those documents in this timeline. So we like to match the PICRA timeline down here. So we're going to ignore what I have written down here. VA buyer cannot. But whoever does pay for it, they're allowed to choose whatever company that they want. What's important about that is that if you mark seller, keep in mind the seller might have a contract or a service agreement with a pest control company. It's worth it to reach out and find out from the listing agent if they do, because it might be within their cost to come out and do an inspection and have the work done.
Which can help with paragraph 13, because paragraph 13 would be under required.
Exactly.
So sometimes that saves the day.
It can.
If it goes over.
Yeah. If for some reason the documents don't get turned over in the timeline that hopefully you have matching the PICRA, you don't have to have all the work done with this timeline, but the reports need to be turned over within this timeline. If they're not, the other party can go ahead and order the inspection and ask to be reimbursed. These days, I put down to the tune of 110 because our moisture and termite inspections are creeping up there in cost. I would say back in 2016, they were like $75. Now they're
95.
Now they're coming up a little bit higher.
Just put it higher just in case.
Exactly. You want to make sure you get that reimbursement. All right. Coming down here, obviously marking the drinking water. And again, this one is usually seller. All right. So have a conversation with the listing agent. If it's a property that you're writing on that does have septic, I like to find out if it's been pumped within the last 3 to 6 months. Some people go as long as 2 years, but if it has not been done, you can request um, down here in the inspection shall or shall not that it does get pumped before closing. And that, because we're in the cap section, falls under that category of the cap that the seller is responsible for paying for. In a situation where you know you're writing an offer on a property that does have septic and you're concerned about anything waiver wise or anything else, for that person, I would actually raise the cap so that the sellers are prepared to come out of pocket on that. Walk through home inspection. Different schools of thought on this. I've actually changed what I do here. And now, if all possible, I do 2 walkthrough inspections. This is something that I learned from Ms. Jordan. She does one a couple days out, and then she does one with the buyers like the day before, within a 24-hour period before. And I've started to adapt that. The main reason is because if there is going to be an issue, let's go ahead and respectfully and give the sellers time to address it, instead of, we're in a 24-hour period and are we pushing back closing because we need a plumber? Or could we have found out that maybe we need a plumber a couple days beforehand? Finding water on the floor seems to be the number one thing I find at a walkthrough. So very here, seller to be responsible for providing all utilities required for such inspection. The only time I've ever seen that not be the case is if we're doing a short sale or bankruptcy. Sometimes the utilities have been turned off. The buyer can have the utilities turned on in their name, but that is always, of course, a risk. And at the walkthrough, what you're checking at the walkthrough is making sure that your PICRA items are done, any repairs that you've asked to be done, that the home is in the same working order as the time that you viewed the property. And anything that wasn't working at that time, if it was on the PICRA list, it should be done. One of the things that I like to do is I'll hand the walkthrough document to the buyers, and I put the onus on them to check everything. I'll give them some pointers as if to say, let's go ahead and start a dishwasher load. Let's go ahead and start a washing machine load if that's on there. And then I'll check and try to put eyes on the PICRA items while they go through and mark everything on that walkthrough inspection document. Again, putting the onus on them so that they don't come back to you and say, oh, this one outlet is not working, or this light bulb's out, or something like afterwards. Have them check it. And the way that I tell them to check the water heater is to turn on the hot water at every sink. Explain to them that if the house has been vacant for a while, it's going to take a little bit for the hot water to come through, but hopefully it does within about 2 or 3 minutes. And as long as you get hot water, the water heater is working. But I do like to hand them that walkthrough document. All right. So we're going to come down here to, this has changed. This changed, I think, last summer, the information about condo POA or HOA dues. They've made it a little bit simpler here, but we still need to do our due diligence. I like to look at the MLS, call the association, verify the fee, because that fee does go up. And I would say recently it goes up year over year. It used to be every couple of years, but it does seem to go up almost year over year, especially with inflation. So call and verify. They'll be perfectly happy to talk to you. They're not going to answer any questions about the condo documents. That inquiry needs to come from the seller. And that's why we have the seller put in for a copy of the condo documents, and we don't do that. If the fee is actually different and significantly higher than what it says in the MLS, that can actually change the buyer's ability to purchase the home, right? If they're maxed out at the top of their budget with a condo fee of $250 and now it's $315, that is a higher purchase price. So that conversation needs to happen between you, the buyer, and the lender to see if that can be covered. but don't sleep on it. And then you're going to mark down here how much the fee is, of course, once you have verified. And if it says HOA, that falls underneath the Property Owners Association. All right. And then, of course, this details the timeline that has to do with the condo contingency or document contingency. Once those documents have been received, they'll be received by you and your buyer. That is day 0. Your client has 3 days to state that they want out of the contract based on what's in those documents. They do not have to address what it is in those documents. It could be because they're not allowed to paint the door red and they've always dreamed of painting the door red. They are allowed to walk away from this contract and their EMD will be released. But we have to stay diligent on that timeline. You need to be very careful that that doesn't hit your spam and your client's spam. So I do like to communicate with the listing agent because they're also going to be notified when the condo documents have dropped.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Just backing up
Mhm.
on this condominium.
Yeah.
And this is new to me.
Okay.
There's 2 check marks to pick condominium created pursuant to Virginia Condo Act or condo created pursuant to Horizontal Property Act.
So it's the first one.
We
So
always go.
If it's condo,
Right.
yes. If it's a condo, that's the first one gets checked. I don't think that we have a Horizontal Property Act.
Okay. Yeah, because
Here.
that's brand new.
No, I don't think that we have that here.
All right.
It's the first one or the third one.
And sometimes it can be both, like in Sherwood
can
Lakes,
be
you have
both.
a condo and a property.
Exactly. Do not forget to put that down here and combine those fees.
So
That's
we
very
are not
important.
ever going to use the second.
I don't know, not ever. I haven't come across a situation where I have.
All right. So I can email Austin.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, because I've never seen that.
This changed, I want to say, last July.
Mhm.
That's when they changed how this
Yeah,
was
I just
here.
haven't dealt with a condo.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's an option for co-op, but I think we only have 2 in Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
There's a few in Norfolk.
If you're in New York City, they're all
It's a
over.
totally different, yeah.
Right.
No, we have Westminster Canterbury. And I think that we have one other one, and that's it. All right. And that's a whole different ballgame. Initials at the bottom. Coming down to property inspections. So we are finished with the 4 parts under the cap. So for property inspections, we are, again, a buyer beware state. So all inspections fall on the buyer, and they have an option. Now, because this is something that we're hiring a third party to do, this is not something that is ever reimbursable. I've never seen anybody try to get it reimbursed, but it's important that your buyer is aware of that before moving forward with the home. We're not just willy-nilly putting out a bunch of offers and doing a bunch of home inspections. It's going to cost you. It's based on square footage. And I would say in this area, we're seeing home inspections go between $450 and like $6 these days. And then if you want to add a sewer scope, that can be anywhere from $150 to $275.
A whole
I do recommend a sewer.
houses.
Yep. I do recommend a sewer scope done. There's a couple of home inspection companies that automatically do them included, but there are also some that it's an additional cost and it's worth it if the house is on slab and it has some age to it. Even if it doesn't have age to it, you want to go ahead and have that done. The way that I convince my buyers that it's a smart piece of advice to take is I did have a situation where somebody chose not to do a sewer scope, bought a house on slab, moved in, washing machine got backed up. The previous owners had had dogs and constantly washed the blankets. They had cast iron pipe under the house. It got backed up. It couldn't just be scoped and cleaned out. They had to replace the cast iron pipe. And on top of that, they had to obviously drill into the floor and replace all the flooring. So $17,000 is what my client ended up owing on that. And it all could have been avoided for shelling out, between $150 and $275. So it's always worth it. Now, if the buyer wants to waive a home inspection, that is their right. But we definitely want to advise them that because it's a buyer beware state, what that means is the seller doesn't need to tell us necessarily if there are problems. We always want to hope that they disclose, but they don't have to in Virginia. So the buyer can waive it. The buyer can also desire the home inspection, but they can say they'll do it for informational purposes only on a pass fail, which means they still have a contingency period. They're just stating that they're not going to ask for repairs. We can get into a deeper conversation about that another time. But if a buyer does waive the home inspection, the important thing is there's no reason to fill out the PICA in that situation. EFIS, if we have that fun stucco, we don't see a ton of it in our area, but you definitely would recommend that they get an EFIS inspection. Those are going to run your buyer between $1,800 and $2,200. But again, they are worth it. There's a lot of times that there could be mold or moisture that we just can't see with our naked eye on the outside. Lead paint disclosure as part of your buyer brokerage agreement, you have already sent them the lead paint pamphlet, and they have signed it and hopefully read through it. And we don't have to worry about that if the home was built after 1978. If it was built 78 or before, it can be an issue. I usually try to make a joke out of it and say, just ask your dogs and your kids not to lick the wall. I mean, honestly, best practice, because these days there's a really good chance that any lead paint has been painted over. Any lead paint that hasn't been painted over and is damaged, a good appraiser is actually going to catch that. And if you know what you're looking for, peeling paint, typically on a ceiling, sometimes near a light, sometimes near a bathroom because of moisture, yeah, we're going to want that. Especially if even seen to the naked eye. But you're going to want to address that.
The best way to remediate is to paint over.
The best way to remediate is just to paint over. Exactly.
It have to be removed by engineering.
Exactly. Other inspections, there's no check mark here, but we're going to address that when we get to the PICA. Okay, coming down here. This is where we want to add other contingencies. You can create contingencies that cover your client's needs. A successful closing of the buyer's home. That is absolutely a home sale contingency. Subject to buyer obtaining acceptable pricing for flood insurance. This is a good way to really look out for your client's best interests, because if that flood insurance puts them over their budget, they now can get out basically on a loan contingency, but put it here so it's above board and everybody's aware that that could be an issue. Subject to, I have a list here of a few things: survey, bankruptcy, divorce, probate, anything that needs a third party approval. So specifically, I just want to address the survey one here. If I have had clients who are looking to buy a house that doesn't have a pool, but they want to put one in, we need to know where the utility lines are. We need to have a survey done. We need to have a pool company come and take a look. So what I'll usually write is contingency here that's either 14 or 21 days, and give them adequate time to get out there. It usually takes about a week for them to get out there. But I have had to knock people out of a contract because we found out they actually could not put a pool where they wanted to. And had I not done that, I might not have been able to get their EMD back. But because I added it here as a contingency, they're covered. And initial at the bottom. Items to convey. As you're walking through a showing, keep an eye on anything here. I always like to mark blinds and hardware. We don't necessarily need somebody's drapes. If they want to leave them, that's probably because they're custom to the property. But if you mark blinds and you don't mark hardware, you could end up with blinds on the floor and holes in the wall. So let's just not do that. Any items around the fireplace, if they have some high-end equipment or screen or any of that, you want to make sure that you're asking for it. Don't just assume it's going to convey. Same thing with the garage door openers and remotes. It's worth a text message to say, are there remotes? Are they in working order? If they're not in working order, maybe that's something that you can ask for in the PICRA. Always a good idea to put down here items to convey at no cost to the buyer, adding no value to the property. So say, for example, a home has been flipped and they have really, really nice fixtures in there, right? Dining room lamps all over the home, really beautiful doorknobs, things like that. You want to go ahead, and I'll even put verbiage in here that say all items that were at the home on the day of showing to convey with the property. Again, just to cover everything. Worth it. I know a lot of people put all for ceiling fans. I find that it's worth it to count it. So coming down here, for the most part, most situations are going to be number 2, where each party to the transaction has their own representation. There are times that you can mark other ones. Another one that we probably see a good amount in this office is when we have a designated representative agreement. So that's going to be number 6. We don't do dual agency, but we do designated. So that's when you might actually have a buyer who's interested in your listing. You're going to turn that buyer over to another agent in the office, and you become designated agents. And you just really want to make sure that the two of you have agents, even if you're best friends, you are not discussing this transaction at all. That needs to be shut down. Coming over to the ACUs, the military noise disclosure. You want to verify what's listed with the MLS, and that is what is listed on the ACUs. I have seen, where maybe they put down something else. Perhaps they looked at a listing that they thought was a comp, but it wasn't. So just verify, double check. You can also look at the tax assessor's website. It'll state that. And that is something that can change over time. So we're going to come down here. Agency interest disclosure. This is important. If you have any relationship with your buyer whatsoever, either by blood or marriage, disclose the buyer. If they have a real estate license, sorry, I was using voice to text. It says parentheses. That's great. In any state, best to disclose, best to not keep anything secret. If they're an LLC, an S corp, etc., is named as the purchaser, disclose if agent or family has any interest, any relationship on the listing side will and has to be disclosed in the listing, in the agent remarks. And you as the buyer's agent, you want to copy that into this purchase agreement. All right, down. These are all sections that are also addressed in the CDIF. So when you're going over them with the buyer, it should be the second time you've had a conversation about it. So brokerage fee, this is one of the changes. This is an easy one for this section. We'll talk about it in the listing agreement when we get to that. But we can do away with the brokerage fee document because it's addressed here. And we no longer tell sellers that they're paying us and that we are paying the selling agent. We are letting the sellers know that they are paying us and they are paying the selling agent's firm a percentage as well. As the buyer's agent, this is where you want to have a conversation with your client that you are asking for 3% or a flat sum. I usually only see a flat sum in somebody who's helping investors. Usually they'll just pay, a flat, $2,000, $3,000 instead of a percentage of the purchase price. And that can actually work out beneficial if they're buying something that's on the cheaper end. So work that out. Again, more information that's covered by the CDIF, but still worth to have conversations with the buyer about it. Other provisions. This is a catch-all section for anything else that needs to be referenced. Example, the seller is going to provide a 1-year home warranty from the date of closing of a buyer's choice of company and not to exceed. Now, I put 600 in here, but honestly, these days, depending on the issue, if there's an HVAC age issue, I would actually take this all the way up to 750 to make sure that they can get really the best home warranty that can address the house's issues. But what's important here is that as the buyer's agent, you're the selling agent, you're the one who's going to order that. Don't wait until last minute. But that document can be sent from the home warranty company directly to the title company and be part of the paperwork. It doesn't need to be paid for outside of that. If you're selling a FSBO, this is where you're going to mark the commission to Coastal Town Realty and list that here. That does not go under contingencies. That goes in the other provisions section. Can you think of anything else that you would put in section 20 for other provisions? Anything else that you would ask for? That doesn't necessarily fit in any other categories?
No,
Okay.
because contingencies are the only other glitch.
Exactly.
They're contingencies. This-
Exactly. These things are not contingent. So,
Because anything else asking for will be items to convey.
exactly. And that's where we put them.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. All right. In this section here, this is important, and I've underlined the important part. If buyer and seller do not initial a note below, digital signatures are not acceptable for use in this transaction. Now, you might, and I've had this happen, have a seller who's a bit on the older side and not great with email, or maybe a couple who are both on the deed only have one email address. That can be problematic if they don't want to start, say, just a throwaway Gmail account. If they want to sign everything as a wet signature, meaning in person, if you can handle that, that's fine. You still want them to sign here, because if they don't sign here, it means the other party cannot sign electronically. So for the ease of the process, have them sign here regardless of whether or not they plan on physically signing in the future. Initial at the bottom, and then of course this last page, you're going to fill out all this information to the best of your ability, and any information that you cannot find, you're going to go straight to DPOR. And DPOR, well, the MLS is going to have an address. You can find it there, but so will DPOR. I like to take it from DPOR because sometimes addresses are different. So I always default to the one that's in DPOR. All right. So that was a fast look at the purchase agreement. What I do want to dip into, just for our last 10 minutes or so, is the PICA. Again, if the PICA is not included, that typically means that they're waiving. Just make sure that that is marked in the purchase agreement that they're actually waiving the home inspection. So for the PICA, again, we're going to make sure that the date here is matched offer date. Okay, and then all of these items here should match the top of the purchase agreement. You're going to put the full address. It's all the way down to zip code and everything. Obviously, what I have here is just a throwaway one. And then we're going to mark, if we're doing a home inspection, we're going to put a checkbox here. And then we're going to mark buyer or seller should be responsible for providing all utilities. Again, I would say 99% of the time, it is the seller that we're going to hold responsible for providing all utilities. If it's a short sale situation that's taking a long time, or a foreclosure, that might be buyer, but again, it's usually seller. And then if we're going to do a lead paint inspection, if we need to do EFIS, we need to make sure all of these are marked. And then if you want additional inspections, by DPOR licensed, not just handyman, but DPOR licensed. I've listed a couple of the options down here: HVAC, structural engineer, mold, lead, or radon testing. We can put any of those there if you're interested. And then we do have another section for other inspections. And I like this especially for the chimney and the pool. I see a lot of times I have received a home inspection with a PICRA where they're asking for issues to be fixed with the chimney, but they didn't have it filled out on here. And it's made it very easy for me to say the seller's not interested in doing any repairs to the chimney. They did not agree to it when the initial offer came through. But other inspections, you put termite and moisture in here. If they're going to have a survey done, put it in here. Septic, all inspections that the lender or buyer may desire. Copy and paste that. So this comes back to calendar days, not business days, for the removal or release. And you're going to do both numerical and written numerical. Back in the day, it used to be 10 to 14 days. These days, we're doing much faster closings. And if you can shorten that removal contingency period, it's another small thing that you can do to kind of get to the top of the pile, because in the seller's market, sellers don't really want to wait 10 to 14 days. I'm concerned about whether or not they need to put their home back on the market. So if you can shorten this, what I like to do is when I'm filling this out, I am taking for granted that it might take 1 to 3 days to negotiate this, But as I'm filling this out, I will reach out and at least take a look at the schedule that's available on some of the home inspection companies that I like, their websites. You can actually see their calendar, or go ahead and give a call and just say, hey, I'm writing this offer and I'd like to put it down for 5 to 7 days from 5 or 7 days from ratification. Is that something you guys can accommodate? Some of the companies will even let you go ahead and book it online, but just cancel it before 48 hours if you can. They do make that pretty easy these days. So we want to be aggressive to look out for our clients' best interest here. All right, so we have a couple of different ways that this comes to an end. Now, if you're putting forth a PICRA, meaning you're asking for repairs to be done by the seller at seller's cost, if you're turning over a PICRA, you must also turn over the inspection report. If you are not turning over a PICRA and your buyer has blatantly said, there's a red flag in here, I don't want to even ask for them to fix it, I'm afraid of this house, I want out, whatever it is that came out of the home inspection report, it doesn't matter what it is, you're in a contingency period. So you can put forth, I recommend putting forth both a release and a termination. That gets you back your EMD. And if you're in your contingency period, that doesn't present a problem. Excuse me. But what's important here, if the buyer does want to release, you do not turn over the home inspection report. If you try to, there's a good chance the listing agent is going to say, I'm not opening that email, because they need to do their due diligence to protect their seller. Okay, so we have this original time period that you have decided, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, whatever it might be. The next time period after that is the negotiation period. So after you have delivered the PICRA and the home inspection report, they have 5 days to get back to you. You can go back and forth to negotiate within this time period. On the 6th day, they call it the additional day, or day 6, what have you, the buyer can back out on day 6 by delivering a termination notice to the seller. And that's what I have underlined here, within 1 day following the expiration of the negotiation period. So it's a little bit longer than the original contingency period. If it seems like you're going back and forth for a really long time, it's not a bad idea to throw together an addendum to extend the PICRA the contingency period, especially if you run into a situation where your home inspection company or your moisture inspection company cannot get in there within the time that you had already written down. That's why it's important to reach to them when you're putting forth this offer. Time periods are the essence. Know and understand all of your deadlines, your negotiation time periods, and what is needed if repairs are requested. Have honest conversations with both parties about when people can get in there to get the work done. And then we're going to fill out the bottom here. Do you have any questions about that? So that's what I have for today. I hope this was helpful. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon and weekend.